Believe it or not, there used to be a time at Fox News where they did a better job of distinguishing between their news side of the organization and the opinion side of the organization. But over the last handful of years, they have only devolved into what can only be called a propaganda network for the benefit of Donald Trump. But if you end up getting anything out of this video, please remember to smash that subscribe button. I'm trying to make it to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and I would very much appreciate your support. Now, as most of you probably know by now, Kamala Harris went and did a sit-down interview with Fox News' Brett Baier. And Brett Baier is one of those guys who has enjoyed the reputation of being one of the more straight news guys, even though we know he is in the bag for Donald Trump. And we know that because during the 2020 election, after Fox News' decision desk called Arizona for Joe Biden, Brett Baier was out there lobbying the network to retract that call and to lie to their viewers and say that they didn't know who won Arizona. So Kamala Harris had no obligation of going to sit down and doing an interview with not only Brett Baier, but Fox News as well. They paid nearly $1 billion settlement for their role in spreading the big lie back in 2020. So she didn't need to go do this, but she did it anyway. And Brett Baier just proved to the world that he is in the bag for Trump, because this looked like more of a Trump campaign interview than anything else. So let's go ahead and analyze how this interview went down from the perspective of Fox News' Brett Baier and how they framed all of the questions and whatever. So let's go ahead and kick things off by looking at the very first question out of the gate. And Brett Baier wants to argue and talk over Kamala Harris.
You know, voters tell pollsters all over the country and here in Pennsylvania that immigration is one of the key issues that they're looking at this election, and specifically the influx of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration, because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number, do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And
so as you can see there, Brett Baier is very combative. He's talking over Kamala Harris. Not to mention, the question that he's asking is kind of nonsensical. It's a gotcha question. Well, how many undocumented immigrants came across the border and were led into the country under the Biden and Harris administration? That's not really a question that is super important to the border issue itself. When people talk about the border, they want to hear how people are going to address those issues with policy. So asking gotcha questions just makes you look bad here. Let's go ahead and move on, where Kamala Harris is trying to give an answer about the actual border bill that the Biden administration pushed as soon as they got into office. And again, Brett Baier is cutting Kamala Harris off.
The first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
I'm
and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising,
okay,
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
So again, super combative, talking over the vice president. And I don't know if he is just trying to make himself seem like aggressive or combative, like he's playing to the audience of one, being Donald Trump. I don't know what his tactic is here, but it definitely doesn't look good for somebody who purports to be a straight news guy. This does not air or give you any credibility when you are berating the vice president and not even giving her the time to answer the questions that you're asking. So I think that this is a really bad look for Bret Baier, and we can go ahead and move on to him improperly framing the question about the bipartisan border bill that was actually blocked by Trump.
But actually is focused on fixing it.
6 Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise.
So this is basically a talking point straight out of the Trump campaign. The border bill, the bipartisan border bill that they are discussing, nowhere in that bill does it say we are letting in 1.8 million undocumented immigrants each year. It talks about a threshold that if that threshold is met, as far as border crossings go, then the president can shut down the border. So to frame it in such a disingenuous way is just dishonest. The border bill does not say we are going to let nearly 2 million undocumented immigrants in per year. And so I don't even know why he would frame the question that way unless he was trying to do more work for the Trump campaign, because this is exactly how they framed the issue when Donald Trump stepped up and blocked that bill from passing. So, another weird thing during this interview was when Bret Baier actually played a Donald Trump ad during the interview. I thought this was extremely insane. Let's go ahead and take a look at that.
This particular one from the Trump campaign has gotten a lot of attention.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
So what is the point of showing a Trump campaign ad in the middle of an interview against his opponent? Does anybody else find that strange? Because I think this is super weird. He could have simply asked the question, which was pertaining to whether or not you support transition surgeries for inmates or undocumented inmates. Why did he need to show the Trump ad? It just makes you look more in the bag for Trump, and you're showing your bias here. So we should definitely not give Bret Baier the credibility of being one of their straight news guys. It's just crazy to me. But let's move on to probably the most circulated portion of this interview, where Bret Baier is talking about how Donald Trump was responding to a question about his enemy within comments, but when he plays a clip of Trump saying these comments, he leaves out very important context. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, and then we'll discuss.
We asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Bret, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Kamala Harris is rightfully upset here because Bret Baier left out very important context to what Donald Trump was actually saying. So let's go ahead and look at the full context of that clip, and then we can better understand why this was so disingenuous on Bret Baier's part.
It is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous. They're Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick. I use a guy like Adam Schiff because they made up the Russia hoax. It took 2 years to solve the problem. Absolutely nothing was done wrong, et cetera, et cetera. They're dangerous for our country. We have China, we have Russia, we have all these countries. If you have a smart president, they can all be handled. The more difficult are, the Pelosi's, these people, they're so sick. And they're so evil. If they would spend their time trying to make America great again, it would be so easy to make this country great. But when I heard about that, they were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. But think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
All right.
They're the threat to democracy.
So as you can see there, very important context was left out of what Bret Baier played. Donald Trump is literally calling out Democrats by name and saying they are the enemy from within and that it would be justified to use the United States military against those people. So for Bret Baier to leave that out is doing a disservice to all Americans, because it is unprecedented that we have somebody who is running for president who is explicitly saying that he is going to go after his political opponents, and he might use the military to do that. So Kamala Harris was rightfully upset that he did not play the full clip. And if Bret Baier wants to say that he is a straight news guy, he should be honest with his viewers as well, because he probably knows that most of the Fox News viewers aren't seeing Donald Trump in that full context. That's why I believe that this is more like propaganda, and he's not willing to show the fuller context to these things because he is trying to get Trump elected. He's in the bag for Trump, and he did not do himself any favors during this interview. Let's go ahead and move on to Bret Baier asking another gotcha question about President Biden's mental decline.
Let me ask you this, Madam Vice President. You call Donald Trump.
The significance of that.
You call Donald Trump. He's misguided. You say now
he's
unstable.
He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room. And he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And Donald Trump
but
is.
You talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I mean, this is just shameful behavior by Bret Baier. This sounds like another question coming straight from a Trump surrogate on a Fox News interview. I mean, these are the types of things the Trump campaign has been spreading, that Kamala Harris was somehow covering up for the true status of Joe Biden's mental state. This is just another gotcha question. In the grand scheme of things, this question doesn't really matter, especially when we're talking about Kamala Harris's plans for the future of this country. And you're spending time asking these gotcha questions, it just seems weird to me and out of line. If you're claiming to be a stand-up, honest journalist and you're doing this to Donald Trump's opponent, man, it just rubs me the wrong way. We'll go ahead and look at one more clip, and let's check out how Brett Baier ended the conversation with Kamala Harris.
Madam Vice President, they're rapping me very hard here. I hope you got to say what you wanted to say about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things.
There's more to say. I have much more to say,
There are a lot of
actually.
things that people want to learn about you and your policies,
Yes.
and that's why we invited you
I invite everyone
here.
to go to kamalaharris.com, and you will see that I have 80 pages of policies that are quite comprehensive and should be accessible to anyone who would like to read them. And it includes what I intend to do about affordable housing, what I intend to do about small businesses, what I do
And that's why we invited you
strengthen our
here,
economy,
to see where you were in 2019 and where you are now.
support America's military and
Again, so even when he's wrapping up the conversation, he is still talking over her, still being what looks to be combative. And the reason I really wanted to play this clip was because he says that, you know, we had you here so we could learn about you and we could learn about your policies. But this interview was anything but that. He just spent his time with gotcha questions, playing Donald Trump ads in the middle of the interview, asking weird questions about transgender surgeries in prison, which is such a niche issue. I didn't hear any questions about Kamala Harris's economic policy agenda. He very briefly touched on some foreign policy, but it was more of a gotcha, like, well, what do you think our greatest threat is right now? It didn't seem like an honest way to approach that either. So overall, I don't think this interview went well for Brett Baier. I think he showed his cards here, and we can see that Fox News has devolved into a propaganda network for Donald Trump. And I think Kamala Harris handled herself the best way that she could. I think some of the parts she could have performed a little bit better, but especially when it came to that enemy from within stuff, she did an excellent job of pushing back against that and trying to make sure that the American people know that Donald Trump is out there threatening to go after his enemies with the United States military. And every American should know that because it is so unprecedented. So shame on Brett Baier. He did not come across good to me in this interview at all. And kudos to Kamala Harris for walking into the lion's den and fighting it out. Hopefully there was at least a viewer or two that was actually paying attention to what she was saying instead of focusing on Brett Baier arguing and speaking over her. But I will leave it there. If you guys got anything out of this video, please remember to smash that like button and subscribe. Maybe share it with a friend or two. I'd very much appreciate that. Like I said, I'm trying to make it to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and I would very much appreciate your support. If you want to see Donald Trump's epic meltdown at the Economic Club of Chicago, go ahead and watch that video on the screen now. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one.